Good morning, and I would just like to thank each and every one of you for being here with us today as we celebrate the Women's Month, Awareness Month, and today we have Maysoon Khatib. Thank you for being here, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thanks for the love, y'all. Okay, a little bit about myself before we get started into my spiel, right? I was a little bit taken aback at first when I saw the brochure of the title of my speech and how one woman fights hate with humor, and I thought, am I Chris Rock? Like, I can't even make the whole world laugh that much. I'm funny, but not on demand, right? So a little bit about myself. I'm an adjunct professor from Murray State University. I teach public speaking. And my side gig is that I'm managing editor of MuslimGirl.com, which is an online magazine for millennials, millennial women in particular, to uplift them and also to reclaim our narrative. And I'll get a little bit more into that later on. But first I wanted to talk to you a little bit. My hands might be shaking, y'all, and it's not. Listen, I had 7 cups of coffee this morning, 2 Red Bulls, and some meth. And I'm just kidding, I don't drink Red Bull. But listen, we're made up of many different fabrics. You know, the minute that we're born, we're draped and surrounded by warm fabric that's covering us. And as we get older, those fabrics kind of change with us depending on, you know, what culture we're from or what style that we are more drawn to. And so that fabric makes us who we are, right? Who am I? This is a question people always ask. When I walk into a room and I start talking and chatting and all the time, people are like, who are you? I'm like, you don't know me? You're about to get a dose of some Maysoon that you may not have wanted. But I digress. I am a Palestinian, I am a Brazilian, I'm an American, I'm a Muslim, I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, cousin, aunt, all of the above. I'm a bit neurotic. I have body issues. I think I'm woke. I just found out what that meant not long ago, but y'all, wake up, right? I believe in everything good in this world. I'm an eternal optimist. So for someone in my position as a woman, I firmly believe in that motto, hear me roar. I walk into a room and I make sure that the first thing you do is hear me roar, whether it be big lion hair coming out at you or just my voice. And excuse my voice today because it's a bit scratchy. I've been dealing with a cold. Oh, did I mention I'm also a hypochondriac? So yesterday when I texted my daughter who was out, I said, you better get home because I think I have the plague and you need to come home and take care of me very, very soon. So recently my husband got into this DNA kick, and there's 6 of us in the house and a dog, and we all got our DNA results back, and now he's looking to see if there's DNA results for the dog too, because he wants to know if the dog has any Arab in him like we do, which he's a Murray dog, he's white. Can I say that? He's got one blue eye, which is why I got him, because I always wanted one kid with a blue eye, and so we found this dog and we're like, bring him home. So we have Scout. Anyway, we got our results back from the DNA testing, and I always said that I was for sure 50% Palestinian and 50% Brazilian and American born by the grace of God, right? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have been living a lie. That's not who I am. I'm actually 24% Hasidic Jew. And I was like, dude, we've been fighting for this land forever, and like I can claim it now. I'm really excited about this. I am 3% Scandinavian, so like that explains my big bones. Like I'm a Viking. And I realized that I was only 3% Brazilian. So I wish my mom was alive because I'd be calling her and asking her, what in the world have I been telling people I've been Brazilian this whole time? It turns out we are from the Iberian Peninsula, which means that somewhere down the line, my family members who were from Spain and Portugal made their trek to South America, and that's how we ended up there. So identity and nationalism is so vague because you think you're something until you find out that that's not what it is. So for a good month, I was asking myself, well, who am I? Like, I felt lost. I've been dealing with this identity crisis for so long now that, am I not American enough? Because from the minute I was born until the minute I entered elementary school, I knew that I was Brazilian and Palestinian, and we spoke this mixture of Arabic and Portuguese and some English because of TV, right? My parents thought they were cute, and they would separate the house into different countries. So when I was in the kitchen, where my mother spent most of her time, I would speak predominantly Portuguese. When I was in the hallways or the bedrooms or even the bathroom, it was only Arabic. And the living room was kind of Switzerland, where because the TV was there and English was spoken on the TV, I was able to use English. By the time I made it to elementary school, they put me in ESL, even though I was born in the United States, because my English was so tore up, y'all. It didn't get any better once I moved to Murray because I had to learn the jargon of the southern state. I learned phrases like, I might could. That's always my favorite. My husband will ask me, do you think you're going to do the dishes today? I might could. I'm not sure. I have to think. I'll get back to you, y'all. I learned jargon like, bless your heart, which can be used in many different ways, right? Bless your heart can mean like, you are so precious. There's this beautiful little girl. Bless your heart. You are just amazingly beautiful. Or you can run into somebody who just is not your cup of tea and you don't want to use profanity and you say, bless your heart. It just all depends on how you use it, right? So we're made up of these different fabrics. In terms of family member, I want to tell you a little bit about how family makes me who I am. This is Women's History Month, and one of the things that I love about my faith in Islam, I'm a Muslim, is that we believe that the gates of heaven are under the mother's feet. That's how high of a role a woman has in our faith. And I think there's a misconception about the role of women in Islam, what we see from the TV and media, and just stereotypical images that we've always been, faced with, whether it be in movies or in books. And so a lot of times I have to remind my kids, do you not know who I am? Again, this identity. Do you know who I am? Like, your entrance to heaven is under my feet. Rub them. So I get a lot of free massages, which is really great. I highly encourage all of you women here to use that with your kids. So I have 4 children. The oldest is my 24-year-old daughter, who I'm having a hard time letting go. You do the best you can in raising your kids, and you want them to be successful and very independent. But when they tell you, Mom, I've graduated, I've got my degree, it's time for me to move on, I'm like, whoa, shouldn't you get married first? Well, Mom, I have to date in order to find somebody. No, I'll find you somebody. And then you get married, and then you go to somebody else's house. And she's like, Mom, I'm a peacock. Let me fly. And I'm like, don't ruffle your feathers, honey. You're going to sit down until I say you can move. So there's this different interaction that I have where I believe in the empowerment of women, but yet there's this beautiful young woman in my own house that I'm having difficulty letting go. And it's really, I cry about it all the time. And let me tell you, as a woman of faith, I pray 5 times a day. And in each one of those prayers, I'm on my knees prostrating and my head is to the ground. And the one thing that I pray for so much is, dear God, please let her stay with me for a little bit longer. And it makes me want to tear up every time I think about it. But then reality sets in, and I met with my 3 sons, who give me a big dose of get a grip, Mom, because you still have us to take care of. And so my 3 boys, Ali, Omar, and Mohammed, who we tell everyone we got their names from the terrorist watch list, are a handful. Ali's 12, and Omar and Mohammed are 11. They're twins. And they were a blessing. I mean, they just came right after another, so it's like I'm having triplets in the house. But each one is so different than the other. And growing up, I wasn't that secure with my identity. It was during the time in the 80s of the Iran hostage crisis, if any of you guys remember, or maybe you've read about it because you weren't even born yet, right? And I was in elementary school, and we were living in Southern California at the time, and if any of you recall, there was a beautiful song that they did for the hostages called Tie a Yellow Ribbon. And I believe John Denver had sung it. And we had an assembly. I must have been in the 2nd grade, and it was a warm day in Southern California, and we all went to the front of the school where the assembly was happening, and there were yellow ribbons, and they were tying yellow ribbons around new trees that they planted for our hostages that we were waiting for to come home. And behind me stood 2 of my favorite teachers. They were just amazing to me. They took me under their wings, and they were always making sure that I was okay. And I heard them speaking. And during that moment, one of those moments that you never forget as a child, they said, "Those barbarians, those Arab Muslims, we're going to get them good." And I remember my legs started shaking and my hands started shaking, and I started to feel very sick to my stomach. And I held back the tears as much as I could because I thought, do they know? Do they know I'm one of them? Now, mind you, at the time, I'm not Iranian. I wasn't part of the whole hostage crisis, but they said Muslim. And that was me. Was I a barbarian? And I was really scared. So that day, I went home crying to my mother. And it was a rainy night, or it was a rainy afternoon. Excuse me. And I told my mom what happened. My mom, being an immigrant from Brazil, married to an immigrant from Palestine, was very concerned because one of the things that she always wanted to make sure was that I wouldn't be treated differently because of who we were, right? So she would always tell me, if anyone asks you what you are, say you're Brazilian. Don't let them know that you're Arab because maybe they'll give you a bad grade or maybe they'll fail you. And so these were always things that were being emphasized in my head. You know, immigrants are new to this country, and imagine if you were in a different country and not sure of how people felt about you, you would probably want to keep it low-key, right? Just until you get a feel for things. So I went home that evening and I told my mom what had happened, and she didn't drive. She never drove. And so she said, "Come on." She took my hand, she took her purse, we walked the mile that we had to what was called TG&Y, which is like a Joann's fabric. And she bought like a yard of yellow fabric. And we went home that night and we cut strips of yellow fabric. And that evening, as we cut the strips of yellow fabric, the rain started to get a little bit harder. At first, it was just a drizzle. But we still went outside that evening. Neither of us spoke. And we began to tie yellow ribbons around each tree that we found. And it didn't matter if they were old oak trees, as the song had stated. We just found trees. And her and I, by ourselves, in our small little neighborhood, started tying these yellow ribbons around every tree that we found. We went home after we were done. And my mom was crying. My dad was still working late. We owned a store, a grocery store, and he was still working late. And she said, "Don't tell your father what happened." And I said, "Okay." And she drew me a hot bath. And I took a bath that night, went to bed, and we never talked about it again. But we felt like we had to prove to someone, even though nobody was watching, how American we were. These are some of the things that happen when you're a child of immigrants, right? So I didn't get my mojo of who I really am until after I birthed all of these kids. My kids are my inspiration, and let me tell you why. Especially living in the South, you would think that after almost 6 years of being here, the youngest boys were starting kindergarten and first grade when we first moved here, and my daughter was doing her freshman year of college when we first moved here. And you would think that they would kind of assimilate to the culture around them, but it was just the opposite. They were so intent on making sure that they stood out, and they didn't want to hide anything. And I thought, this is so different than how it was for me growing up. So when two of my sons, Ali and Omar, had to go to speech therapy because of their speech impediments, I remember I had to sit behind a two-way mirror and watch them as the therapist would work with them. And one lady in particular had sat with Omar, and she said, "Omar, let's use words that start with S." And he said, "Great. The Muslims are coming." And I sat there and I held my breath, and I'm like, holy cow. I said, holy cow. And he said, "The Muslims are coming. Muslims are great. They love spaghetti. They love stories. And he proceeded to use anything that he could think of with S's. And you can tell the therapist was like kind of taken aback. And he said, "Muslims love peace, and they love good things in life, and they love family. And do you love all these things? If you love all these things, then you're Muslim too." And she said, "How about we try to use the sound TH?" And he said, "Great. The Muslims love people, and they're coming." And so she said, at this point, she looked at the mirror, knowing that I was on the other end, and she just smiled at me. And I thought, well, this is funny. He's not afraid. Why am I? So I determined from there that there was more to life than just hiding who you are and who you want to be and who you were. That's what makes you who you are. That's your fabric. That's what you're wrapped in, right? But with 2016, we saw a definite change in the climate, in the political climate. There were a lot of things going on, right? We had a lot of terrorist attacks going on, the one in San Bernardino, which is my hometown, by the way, that I grew up in California. And the incident that happened in San Bernardino was not far from our grocery store, actually. And we had the incident in Paris, and then there was another bombing in England, in Manchester, and so on and so forth. And every time you turned on the news, it was another Muslim terrorist. And so the term Islamophobia came to fruition. I mean, it had always been there, but it became one of those hot words that people heard of a lot. And so during this time, I had already been working for MuslimGirl.com for 2 years by that time. And a lot of our stories that we write are about taking back our narrative. We were reclaiming our narrative. And one of the reasons that it came about was because there weren't enough representation on the news, on TV, that spoke for us, on behalf of us. Like, we needed to speak on our own behalf rather than some terrorist expert or some Muslim expert that wasn't even Muslim, right? And so what happened was that the spike of hate crimes towards Muslims in America increased dramatically in 2016. And it didn't help that there were people running for office at the time that didn't necessarily favor us. And in fact, there might have been more, not might, but there were more negative light shed upon Muslims. Muslims, by the way, are 1.7 billion in the world. And if I had a pie graph behind me, you would see a big ball of blue with like a sliver of orange. a sliver, like not even, it would be like the line of like a needle in a haystack. And that needle would represent the ones that are radicalists, that are extremists, that don't necessarily represent who we are. I never say that they're not Muslim. Like a lot of Muslims will come and say, no, they're not Muslim. It's the same way as I wouldn't say that a Christian fundamentalist who is like bombing an abortion clinic is not a Christian. That's not for me to say that they're not. So that's not for me to say that these people claiming that they're Muslim are not Muslim. They've gone astray, they're crazy, they're wired differently, whatever it be. But I definitely don't say that they're not Muslim. But we saw a definite increase in hate crimes towards Muslims, in particular Muslim women who wear the hijab. One of the questions I often get is, as a Muslim Maysoon, why don't you wear the headscarf? And I'm not ready for that commitment yet. All of my sisters, I come from a big family, there's 7 of us all together. My dad had 2 wives. It's true, he had 2 wives. One from Palestine and one from Brazil, and one stayed in Palestine and one came to America with my dad. And so his first wife, they had 5 kids, and my mom had 2, my brother and myself. All of my sisters wear the hijab, which is the headscarf. I don't. I plan on wearing it one day, but I've been planning the day that I wear it. How will I wear it? What will be my statement piece? So I thought one of the things that I want to do is to make sure that people still know I'm patriotic. Wearing a scarf does not necessarily mean that I am anti-American, right? So last summer when my husband and I were in San Francisco, we were at Fisherman's Wharf, and I found this handy-dandy thing, right? So if I drape myself, not my face, right? If I drape myself in the American flag, excuse me for a second, I should have practiced this at home. If I drape myself in the American flag, would that make me any more American? It's very difficult for Muslim women who wear the headscarf to prove how American they are, how much they love this country. So we have to make this differentiation between patriotism and believing in a faith that grounds you, right? So why do women wear the headscarf? One day I plan on wearing it. It's baby steps for me. I often say my head is so big and my hair so much that it's going to take me a lot of fabric to cover all this, right? But that's not really the case. Wearing this scarf is a huge commitment, and for every woman that you see wearing that scarf, really, my hat goes off to them. I tip my hat to them, because it's one of those commitments that you make that is very not selfish. You're making a commitment for God. And this is their uniform. It's like seeing a nun walking down the street. Would you think any differently of a nun than you would of another woman walking next to her? You see a nun and you think, the first thing that comes to your mind is, this is a woman of faith. You might even talk to her differently. The tone in your voice may be a little bit different when you talk to her. There might be a little bit more respect. And even in wearing the scarf, a couple of years ago, it was World Hijab Day, and I was teaching at the university, and I was going to wear a scarf for the full day, even in teaching. And I noticed a difference in the way that I spoke that day. So I'm known as like the crazy professor. I come in and I start rapping like MC Rob bass songs. I want to rock right now, right? Like I know the whole lyrics, right? I'm Rob bass and I came to get down. So that day I walked in class and there was no initial rap song coming from me. I felt like my whole demeanor had changed, and not on purpose, but I felt like wearing the scarf on my head made me a different person. I was more calm, I was more relaxed, I was more conscious of the words that were coming out of my mouth, because every once in a while in college, it's, rated NC-17? No. But it's definitely PG and above, right? And so I was very, very conscious of what was coming out of my mouth. But with Islamophobia, these women who wear these scarves every day are putting on their uniforms, basically, and they're walking out of their houses, and they don't know what's going to happen to them. As I said earlier, the hate crime has risen dramatically since 2016. And it's not that it wasn't there before, but now it just seems like it's okay. It's a secret, but not so much a secret. There's something in sociology that's called social sanction, and that is what you can and can't say, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And so for many groups, you say certain things and it's just not okay, right? But for Muslims, there are no social sanctions. You could be president of the United States and say, we need a ban on all Muslims. Not even taking into consideration the nationalities of these Muslims or just the background of these people, right? And so I can walk down the street and I can be at Walmart, for example, and this has happened where a woman dressed in total niqab, which means that she's covering her face as well as her hair, wearing a long flowy gown, international student with her husband, is purchasing an item. And as she leaves, I'm up next with my husband and the cashier says, I don't get them. I said, what? He said, did you see what she was wearing? I said, yeah. And he's like, I don't get it. It's just not right. I said, I like it. He's like, no, it's just not right. And I didn't want to say anything more, but this is the microaggressive kind of comments that I will hear. Well, you're not like them. Why? Why am I not like them? Well, you don't cover yourself. You don't walk behind your husband. Are you kidding me? My legs are short. Like, I'm always behind somebody walking, first of all. And there's this misconception of what a Muslim woman is, that we're submissive, that we're oppressive, or we're oppressed, that we have to ask all of these type of questions and get permission to do all of these things. But Islam is not a monolith. And what I mean by that is that you're not going to look at one Muslim family and another Muslim family and see the same thing. We have our 5 pillars that we observe, but culturally, who are we? We're so different. We're as different as the DNA in your body. And so one of the things that came with Islamophobia is internet trolls. Thank God for the World Wide Web, right? We see a lot of people that are more confident in their hate on the internet. And so whenever something major comes and you turn on the news again, thanks Fox, right? We turn on the news again and we see Muslim terrorists cries out Allahu Akbar before blowing up, fill in the blank. So now the word Allahu Akbar has become synonymous with terrorist activities, which is ironic because Allahu Akbar means God is great. And there was a hashtag that was started on Twitter on hashtag Allahu Akbar. And the Muslims came out and they said, this is how we use Allahu Akbar. So I got into it because, dude, we use Allahu Akbar at least 1 million times a day it comes out of my mouth. My husband gets the credit card statement and he says, Allahu Akbar. My kids come to me and say, there's something I need to tell you. And I immediately say, Allahu Akbar. I found an extra $20 in a pair of old jeans that I haven't worn in a while, and I'm like, Allahu Akbar, right? There are many ways that you can use the term Allahu Akbar. And so these hashtag Twitters and social media is good and bad, right? One, we have these internet trolls that really break us down, and then on another spectrum, we have a community of people that come and kind of stand up with us, and they help us feel better about ourselves by joining and understanding and asking questions, and there's this really back and forth of communication and dialogue that can occur. Another hashtag that was made popular was during the 2016 debates. It was in October, I believe, between Trump and Clinton, and a Muslim woman wearing the hijab got up in the town hall meeting and she asked, What are we going to do about the Islamophobia that's so prevalent right now? And so both candidates, I'm not going to pick on just one because they were both guilty of this, basically stated, if you see something, say something. Telling the Muslim woman, if you see something, say something. That we have a responsibility to call out when we see something that's going on, that's something that's fishy, which I thought was really, really interesting because I don't think that there is a memo that goes out to all Muslims in the world about a terrorist attack. Like, we don't get an email or a text message that says, prepare yourselves, it's going to happen today at 3 o'clock. That's not how it works, y'all. It's just not. So Muslims went on to Twitter and they did hashtag Muslims report stuff. So again, I tend to enjoy those type of ventures. So I said, hashtag Muslims report stuff. My husband keeps complaining that I use too many spices. Somebody come get him. Hashtag Muslims report stuff. 5 out of 6 people in this house were born in the United States. The one that wasn't practices immigration law. Come get him. Right? So we try to use comedy and we try to break down the stress of all of this bigotry and xenophobia and Islamophobia that comes our way. And sometimes it can be a little bit too much for us. When I see the stories about women that are walking in New York subways and their headscarves are being pulled off of their heads, or one woman who was pushed into the subway where the trains are supposed to come, or in London where a woman who was pregnant was pushed down a flight of steps. These things get to my heart, and it shatters that positivity that you want to keep for your children. But I find that each and every day that I wake up, for every negative thing that I read, there's 10 million positive things that come my way. You know, moving to the South wasn't always easy for me. I thought, how am I going to move to the South? How am I going to do this? I lived in Dearborn, Michigan for 12 years. Dearborn, Michigan, we call it Dearbornistan. It's like the hub of Muslims in America. This is my comfort zone. I mean, Middle Eastern restaurants galore, anything that you could possibly want. Even the white kids were using Arabic words. That's how many Arabs are in Dearborn. And then I was going to move to Murray, Kentucky. But I said, you know what, let me make the most of it. I told my husband, when I move to Murray, Kentucky, don't get in my way. I have a plan. I am going to document things. I'm going to show how the other side of the world lives. I'm going to go to Walmart, because I knew there was a Walmart in town, right? I'm going to go to Walmart. I'm going to wear a niqab, the face covering, and I'm going to have my daughter follow me around with the camera and see how many weird looks I get. And I'm going to be asking for stuff and see how people respond. And my husband said, listen, I'm not even tenured yet. Can you please not? Can you just wait till I'm tenured? I said, I don't know. I don't know if I can wait. So the first week we moved to Murray, we go to Walmart as a family, because what are you going to do? I'm new to this town, and there's a JCPenney, and there's a Walmart, and there's a Kroger, and that's about it, right? So we go as a family. I don't have my niqab with me. And I'm in the frozen food section, and I see a woman wearing niqab, and I about lost it. I'm like, who took my idea? I was so mad. And then to top it off, another woman walks up to her, not dressed in niqab, said, Khadija, how are you? And the first thing to come into my head was, how does she know who she is? Her face is covered. So here's my stereotyping mentality coming into my head, And I thought, wow, this is ironic. So I wanted to pull, and at this point, my husband comes behind me, and he sees me going in my purse. He's like, what are you doing? I said, I need to take a picture of this. No one's going to believe me in Dearborn. He's like, do not get us kicked out of town. We just got here. Can you wait till I'm tenured? Can you just wait? I'm like, this is going to be so hard, y'all. So hard. So these are like common stories that happen to us. There's the time when, the woman will come and knock at our door to invite us to come to their church to worship with them. And I love these women that come to the door, right? And I always say that the first thing they say is, "Are you affiliated with a church?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Well, you're new in town?" "No." "Well, have you accepted Jesus?" I said, "I love him." They're like, "Okay, so are you part of Baptist? Are you Church of Christ?" I'm like, "No." So they wait. And then I say, "I'm Muslim." They're like, "Oh, but you said you love Jesus." I said, "I do love Jesus. And in fact, I believe that he's my Messiah. He will come back one day." They're like, "But you're Muslim." I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, how is that possible?" I'm like, "Because Muslims love Jesus." And for many of these people, it's the first time that they've heard anyone tell them that. They have this misconception of what Islam is. In fact, I tell them that Jesus' name is mentioned more times in the Quran than anyone else's name. In fact, his mother, Mary, who we call Miriam, has her own chapter. She has her own chapter in our book. Like usually when women are giving birth to their children, they'll play the chapter of Miriam in the background as they're giving birth, because it shows the strength of the birth of Jesus, the miracle of him. And so this is not a lecture about what Islam is, and I always tell my students when they ask me about me, look, I'm not trying to recruit anybody. In fact, we're trying to get rid of people. Like, we're not trying to recruit, okay? That's not my game. But for many of my students, I'm their first exposure to a Muslim woman. And so I try to keep it positive, but they know. One of the major things that I always tell people is I work with millennials with MuslimGirl.com. These women are some bad mama jammas. Like, you hear stories about millennials and the negativity about the millennial generation, and I always stop them because I say, when I was 25, I was a mom, and all I thought about was, what am I going to make for dinner for my child, right? These women today are different. They are on a mission. They want to fight Islamophobia. They want to fight xenophobia. They want to fight for pluralism, and they want their voices heard. Meanwhile, my generation, my mom was like, keep it on the lowdown. We don't need this kind of drama, right? Today, it's so different. And in fact, with MuslimGirl.com, one of the things that I'm really excited about is if you were to type in Muslim woman on your phone or on the internet and click on images, the first thing that you will have seen are women dressed in black, head covered from head to toe, and looking very dark, for better use of words. Since Muslim Girl's inception, we have made partnerships with so many different major platforms, and one of them is Getty Images. And so now when you type in Muslim woman and you click on images, you'll still see the dark scarves from head to toe, but you'll also get pops of color of real Muslim women and how real Muslim women look like. And some of them will be wearing Gucci and Versace and Louis and anything you can imagine. And some of them are just wearing their, hippie jeans and, casual smocks, and they're just out on the town. And these are the images that we want to show people. Again, we're not a monolith. It's not one thing that is representing our faith. The other thing that we started last year, which went viral during Women's History Month, is March 27th is Muslim Women's Day. And on this day, with our partners from Team Vogue to Glamour, to Huffington Post, to any other kind of platform you can imagine, all day during the 27th, they are publishing stories about the plight of Muslim women, just everyday life stories of Muslim women. And so most of our readers, believe it or not, are people who are not even Muslim. We're a medium where they can come online and just see what's going on. It's their little medicine cabinet. Like, I like to call it a medicine cabinet because when I go in your house, keep your bathroom closed because the first thing I'm going to do is go in your medicine cabinet. I want to see what you're taking, right? So one of the things that Muslim Girl likes to do as well is we like to keep people woke, which is a term that that has been around for a while, but there was another word that they used for it, and it was conscious. And it started from the Black community because so much has happened within the Black community that they had to start telling each other, stay woke, y'all. They didn't use y'all. I'm just assuming in the South they would have added y'all, which is probably why I had this shirt made. But I don't want to take it. I don't want to take that word from them. This is their word. And it's very important for us as allies to any marginalized group to stay woke. And how are some ways that we can stay woke? First of all, first and foremost is to get outside of your comfort zone. Because when we stay within our little small bubble and we refuse to get outside of our comfort zone, those stereotypes and those perceptions remain with us. Second, what you need to do is you need to listen. When they tell their stories, you need to listen. This is not time for you to inject, to deflect. This is not about your story. This is about their story. And what you can do with their story and my story is to go and tell other people about it. Because the best thing to stay woke is to keep that message going. The other thing that you want to do is to invite marginalized people to come to speak, similar to what I'm doing today. And when you are able to give them that opportunity to come and speak, what you're doing is you're allowing somebody to tell their story, because sometimes we just feel like nobody wants to hear it. The last thing that you can do is never stop asking questions. Questions are so important, and never feel that a question that you ask is not important enough. Because if you have that question and I can answer it or somebody else can answer it, well then that's the best thing that you can do to keep that conversation going. You want to always continue to keep that conversation going. So as I started out in the beginning, I talked about how when we're born, we're draped in cloth, that we're made of different fabrics, different textiles, different colors. And I want you to take those different fabrics and remember that although you're not defined by the colors that are in the fabric, they're comforting. Drape yourself for the comfort, but be prepared to talk about it with others and maybe share with them as well. Thank you. So right now, what I like to do at the end of any speaking engagement is I like to give people the opportunity to ask a Muslim a question, because it's not every day that you may be given this opportunity. And so if there are any questions in the audience, I'd love to answer them for you. Yes?
Why do Muslims always seem angry?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. And I always take it back to the media. I mean, you know, it's so ironic because we have so many Muslims in this world that are professionals. We have doctors, we have attorneys, we have engineers, we have business owners, you know, your liquor store owner in the corner, right? We never see stories about the business people giving back to the community. You know, we owned a store growing up, right? And one of the things that my dad, and I don't think he even knew that he was doing community service, it was a lower income neighborhood, and he would give running tabs to people who maybe didn't have enough money by the end of the month, right? And he would let them get groceries to feed their kids, and at the beginning of the month when they got some money, they would come and pay it. And so these are images and stories that we don't hear about and see on the news. So when somebody asks, why do Muslims look so angry? It's because you're not seeing that on the news. What you're seeing is what the media wants you to see. There always has to be the one bad person. And so when I was younger in the 80s, those bad people were the USSR, you know, the Russians and all your movies. There's a professor, and he died last year. His name was Dr. Jack Shaheen, who wrote a book called Real, R-E-E-L, Bad Arabs, and it talked about the different movies that portray Arabs in this very Orientalism manner, you know, and Orientalism was a phrase coined by another professor, Dr. Edward Said, and he talks about how they romanticize and demonize people from the Arab worlds. And so that's one of the reasons why people think that Arabs or Muslims seem so angry all the time, because that's the only thing that the media is letting you see. When you step outside of your boundaries and start looking, who's in your classrooms? Who's living in your neighborhood? Who are you going shopping with, like at the stores? Sometimes it's nice to see, if you see a woman wearing hijab and she's in like the frozen food section like I did, say hi. You'd be surprised at how she's gonna respond back. Thank you for that question. Any others? Yes.
Are your marriages all arranged?
You know, a lot of people ask that. Listen, yes and no. It's not the arranged that people think. It's not like married at first sight. It's not like you're coming into a situation where you are going to marry your first cousin that you haven't seen, like, all your life, and then the wedding is this day and you're flying into this country. It's not like that. When we say arranged marriages, what it means is that your family is involved with it, right? So let's say you're going to school with somebody and there's a guy in your classes, and you know he really likes you and you really like him, hopefully based on this intellect, right? And so the proper thing to do, and it's nothing new. America used to do this way back when, is there would be a courting process. And in order to court you, the respectful thing to do would be to go and talk to your parents first and ask for permission. And so when the families are involved, there's a way of making sure that there's a respect level that is held there. And that makes it a lot more difficult for anybody, the woman or the man, to do something disrespectful to the other, because all families are involved with it. And just so you know, Muslims have come up with, like, this generation too. You've got Tinder, Muslims have Minder. So there's also different dating websites now for Muslims. I mean, things have been changing. Yes, thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Thanks. Sure. So the question was, are there any good literature to read out there, just to get a little bit more information? Well, Muslim Girl put out a book last year. It's by Simon & Schuster, and it's called Muslim Girl, A Coming of Age. And it talks about the founder of Muslim Girl, Amani Al-Khatib, and her experience as a young child when 9/11 first happened, and how that has progressed into what's going on today and what we faced and the different dynamics of that. And that's a great book. It's especially good for millennials to read. It's very easy to read, and it talks about a situation that happened that most people can remember, right? When I talk about the Iran hostage crisis, a lot of times people are like, we weren't born yet. So that is probably one of my favorite ones that I like to put out there. But there's a lot of other literature that you can read. It's so hard to pinpoint one in particular. I love to read scholarly works. So when I talk about Dr. Jack Shaheen's Real Bad Arabs, that's a really good one as well. Yeah. Thank you for asking. Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you for your time.